The movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose marked generations, not only for its terrifying scenes but for carrying something much more disturbing. It is based on an absolutely real case. As much as cinema explores the limits of horror, the story of Anneliese Michel surpasses any fictional script. A young German woman, raised within the principles of Catholic faith, who saw her life turn into an indescribable nightmare. Voices, inexplicable behaviors, and a physical decline so extreme that it still generates heated debates among science, religion, and mystery. In the movie, we are led to believe that supernatural phenomena coexist with medical explanations. But what about real life? The truth is much darker than most people imagine. Anneliese's story is not just about possession. It's about a silent battle that involved priests, doctors, courts, and a young woman who, in the end, became the epicenter of one of the greatest modern mysteries. After all, was this the reflection of a sick mind, or a manifestation of something that defies human understanding itself? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I want to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver the videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. Imagine an ordinary young woman from a small town in Germany, living an absolutely normal life. A religious family, a peaceful routine, a good student, committed to faith and studies. That was Anneliese Michel, someone who, in the eyes of anyone, would never be destined to become the protagonist of one of the most terrifying cases in modern history. Everything started to change when, at 16 years old, she had her first seizure, an event that at first seemed isolated. But as you'll realize throughout this story, that was far from being just a health problem. Doctors quickly reached a diagnosis: temporal lobe epilepsy. And this is where the first points arise that raise the eyebrows of anyone familiar with this type of disorder. Because this condition, besides seizures, is often accompanied by hallucinations, strange sensations, and experiences that defy logic itself. But would that explain everything that would follow? Because over time, the episodes began to go far beyond physical seizures. Anneliese started reporting something that not even doctors could understand. Voices, sounds that appeared out of nowhere, whispers calling her. And they weren't just simple voices, they were threats, insults, voices saying things that no one else could hear. If up to this point you think this could be explained by neurological issues, brace yourself, because things get much worse. She developed a violent aversion to religious objects. Crucifixes, images of saints, holy water. All the things that used to be part of her life now seemed to cause pain, repulsion, and even despair. And we're not talking about symbolic discomfort. Reports say that upon entering a church, she would scream, tremble, and say she couldn't bear it. Her parents, desperate, turned to doctors. They increased the medication doses, sought psychiatrists, neurologists. But curiously, the more medicine tried to intervene, the more intense the phenomena became. Anneliese began acting aggressively, breaking objects, destroying religious images at home, and at times, hurting herself in ways that doctors themselves classified as self-destructive. And here comes a detail that still sends chills down the spines of those who study this case. There are reports, both from family members and witnesses, claiming to have seen and heard Anneliese speak languages she never learned. Latin, Aramaic, languages she had never been exposed to in her life. And it wasn't just simple word repetition. They were complex sentences, full of meaning, often used in extremely specific religious contexts. At this point, what would you do? Would you continue trusting medicine, which was no longer providing answers? Or would you start thinking that maybe, just maybe, you were dealing with something that goes far beyond what science can explain? This was exactly the doubt that began to haunt the Michel family. And it's in this scenario that the figure of the church emerges. Local priests began to be consulted. Initially, just as a form of spiritual guidance. After all, it was a deeply Catholic family. But as the reports piled up, the expressions of the clergymen began to change. It was no longer simply a matter of faith or spiritual comfort. There was something there that didn't fit within normal parameters. On the other side, medicine kept insisting on the diagnosis of epilepsy combined with psychiatric disorders. But then comes that uncomfortable question. If all of this was merely the product of a sick mind, how could one explain the phenomena that not even specialists could understand? To what extent can you blindly trust science, when the unexplainable knocks on your door. It is exactly here that this story begins to transform into something much bigger and much darker than anyone could have imagined. If everything up to this point already seemed terrifying, what happened from here on surpasses any limits of understanding. After the first manifestations, Anneliese Michel's condition collapsed in a way that neither medicine nor traditional faith knew how to control. It was as if a door had been opened, and once opened, there was no way to close it again. The reports that emerged from this period are, to say the least, disturbing. It was no longer just about aversion to sacred objects. The crises began to intensify in a way that seemed to border on the impossible. Anneliese began hearing voices practically all the time, voices that didn't just whisper, but commanded. They ordered her to hurt herself, to injure herself, to stop eating. And there were many times when she obeyed. Witnesses report that, at certain moments, her appearance changed drastically. Her face would take on expressions that didn't seem human. Her eyes would become fixed, her mouth would distort, and in some episodes, her voice became so deep, so guttural, that anyone who heard it swore they were in the presence of something not from this world. But how can something like that be explained rationally? And if that wasn't enough, episodes of superhuman strength began to occur. There are records of situations where 4 or 5 people tried to hold her down, and even so, she managed to break free, thrash around, throw objects, and at times, even injure those who tried to restrain her. A fragile young woman, just over 1.66 meters tall and weighing less than 50 kilograms, displaying absolutely disproportionate strength. How is that possible? But the episodes didn't stop there. She began refusing to eat, not because she wasn't hungry, but because, according to reports, the voices told her she was not worthy of eating, that she needed to suffer. And this decision, over time, led her body to an extreme state of malnutrition and weakness, something that became evident and absolutely shocking in the photos taken in the following months. During this period, the self-harm became constant. Anneliese would bite herself, bang her head against walls, and even tear pieces of her own skin. The most disturbing part? Many times, she did it without expressing any pain, as if something inside her had shut down any physical sensation, focusing solely on the destruction of her own body. And here comes another absolutely bizarre detail that still baffles researchers of this case. According to the priests who began closely monitoring the situation, Anneliese started identifying, with terrifying accuracy, people who had some kind of hidden sin. Reports say that when crossing paths with certain individuals, she would call them by name and reveal things that no one, absolutely no one, could possibly know. How can that be explained? Faced with this scenario, the church could no longer ignore it. Until then, the priests were reluctant to affirm that this was indeed a case of possession. After all, the Vatican follows extremely strict protocols before authorizing an exorcism. But as they observed the phenomena intensifying, and especially after a series of preliminary rituals failed to alleviate any symptoms, it became clear they were facing something far greater than they had imagined. And it's worth pausing here, because at this point, a question arises that echoes to this day. Could the Church's delay in recognizing the severity of what was happening have contributed to the situation spiraling completely out of control? Or even worse, could the very act of spiritual confrontation, instead of helping, have provoked an even more violent reaction from whatever apparently inhabited Anneliese's body? The fact is that from this point on, the only solution they found was to resort to the most feared and controversial ritual of the Catholic Church, the formal exorcism. A ritual that, until that moment, was so rare, it seemed to have been forgotten by the institution itself. And it's exactly here that this case begins to become known worldwide. When the Church finally authorized the exorcism, everything already seemed far beyond any imaginable limit. There was no longer room for doubt. Fathers Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz were assigned to conduct the ritual, a procedure that, until that moment, seemed like something forgotten in time, reserved only for the darkest records of Catholic faith. Right from the first session, a chilling detail became clear. It wasn't just a single entity. According to the priests themselves, Anneliese was being consumed by 6 different presences. Names that, just by being spoken, cause immediate discomfort. Lucifer, Judas, Nero, Cain, Hitler, and Fleischmann. Can you imagine what it's like to live with that inside yourself? The environment where the rituals took place seemed to carry an unbearable weight. Those who were there described something difficult to put into words. And then came the voices. We're not talking about simple screams or moans. The recordings made during the sessions captured sounds that seemed to come from something non-human. Deep, distorted voices, reverberating threats, insults, and even conversations between the entities themselves, arguing with one another as if fighting over that body. These audios, in fact, still circulate on the internet today. And anyone who has had the courage to listen knows exactly what we're talking about. Just a few seconds are enough to feel that shiver running through you, that uncomfortable sensation that maybe you shouldn't be listening to this. It wasn't just the sounds that shocked people. With each new ritual, Anneliese's body seemed to defy any physical limit. Fragile, extremely debilitated, she twisted herself into impossible positions, emitted animalistic sounds, and even weighing just over 30 kilograms, was able to thrash around with a strength that required several people to restrain her. How can something like that be explained? Throughout the sessions, phenomena began to occur that completely escaped any logic. Witnesses reported that at certain moments, objects would vibrate, doors would slam shut on their own, and more than once, the priests themselves felt something invisible pressing against their bodies, pushing them against the wall or away from Anneliese. Was this collective hallucination, or something much more real than we would like to believe? But perhaps the most terrifying thing wasn't the physical violence, but rather the content of what was being said. The voices, one after another, began revealing disturbing details. Secrets from the lives of people present, historical information she could never have known, and even heavy accusations against members of the church itself. And it's impossible not to ask, where exactly were these pieces of information coming from? While all of this was happening, Anneliese completely stopped eating. The voices, according to her, forbade her from eating. Her body, already consumed by malnutrition, began to collapse. Bones protruding, lesions multiplying, bruises everywhere. A physical degradation that, for those witnessing it, seemed like something that did not belong to this world. There were moments when she would perform hundreds of genuflections, the act of kneeling and rising, until her knees literally shattered. And even then, she continued. How does someone at the absolute limit of the human body find the strength to do that? What exactly was driving Anneliese? It lasted 10 months, 67 sessions, and with each meeting, there were no signs of improvement, only a deeper and deeper descent into something that seemed to have no end. The question that begins to arise at this point is no longer whether it was real or not, but how far someone can endure a battle like this before the body simply can't take it anymore. What happened after the exorcism was not just a tragedy, but also a shock that crossed borders and made headlines around the world. On July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel was found lifeless. She was only 23 years old. Her body, weighing just over 30 kilograms, was unrecognizable. And if you think this story ended there, you're wrong. In fact, it was just beginning. The news of Anneliese's death spread quickly, and as soon as the authorities saw the condition in which she was found, an investigation was immediately opened. What the police saw was not just frightening, it was, in the eyes of the law, clear evidence of negligence. But negligence by whom? By medicine, which failed to solve the problem, or by the religious figures who chose to conduct exorcisms instead of conventional treatments. Anneliese's parents and the two priests, Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz, were formally charged with negligent homicide. And that's when the courtroom became a true battleground between science and faith. On one side, prosecutors described Anneliese as a severely ill young woman, suffering from epilepsy and untreated psychiatric disorders. On the other, the defense argued that she was possessed, and that everything done was solely intended to save her soul. Imagine the scene. In a German courtroom, medical experts, psychiatrists, and neurologists presenting reports, diagnoses, and clinical analyses. Meanwhile, in the same room, priests and theologians debated demonic possession, sacred rituals, and phenomena that, even today, the church itself avoids discussing openly. A situation that, in itself, seemed impossible to exist in the 20th century. And here comes a detail that still makes anyone deeply uncomfortable. During the trial, the recordings of the exorcisms were presented as evidence. That's right, those terrifying audios, with screams, overlapping voices, and arguments between the supposed entities, were played in the courtroom. And according to reports, many people in the room couldn't stay until the end. Some felt sick, others simply left crying, unable to listen all the way through. The prosecutors were relentless. They argued that Anneliese needed medical intervention, that she suffered from psychiatric disorders that were not properly treated, and that the exorcisms led her, directly or indirectly, to death by malnutrition and exhaustion. To them, the parents and priests should have relied on modern medicine, not on rituals that, according to the prosecution, belonged to the Middle Ages. But then came the big turning point. The defense brought not only religious arguments but also testimonies from witnesses who claimed, under oath, to have witnessed inexplicable phenomena. Objects moving, strange sounds, physical changes in Anneliese during the rituals, and of course, the well-documented manifestations of her speaking in dead languages. And here arises that uncomfortable doubt. Were they all lying? Or did they indeed witness something that science simply cannot explain? The trial became a worldwide spectacle. Newspapers, magazines, and TV stations followed every detail. Psychiatry experts debated side by side with demonologists. And in the midst of it all was the memory of a young woman who, in some way, had become a symbol of a battle that seemed to have no winners. In the end, the verdict was delivered. The parents and the two priests were found guilty, but did not receive prison sentences. The penalty was 6 months, converted to probation, along with a fine. The court understood that although there was negligence, all involved genuinely believed they were doing the right thing, which, in a way, mitigated the punishment. But in the end, one uncomfortable question remains. Who truly bears the weight of this guilt? Science, which failed to cure her? Religion, which led her down an extreme path? Or perhaps, something that we will never fully understand? Even after the trial, when the justice system had officially closed the case, what lingered was something no verdict could erase. The questions, the doubts, and especially the mysteries that, to this day, remain unanswered. Because as much as science has tried to explain it, there are details in this case that simply defy any logic. The recordings of the sessions remain, to this day, one of the greatest sources of discomfort for anyone who delves into this story. No one comes out of it unaffected. The voices, the screams, the sounds that seem to come from something that shouldn't exist. They're not simple theatrics, nor disconnected words. They are full dialogues, arguments between the supposed entities, each with its own personality, its own tone, its own way of speaking. And honestly, how could someone in total physical and mental collapse be capable of sustaining that? And what about the languages? This might be one of the most unsettling pieces of the entire puzzle. There are clear records that, during the rituals, Anneliese spoke not only Latin, but also Aramaic and other dead languages. And it wasn't just isolated words, they were complex linguistic constructions, used correctly within specific contexts. This raises an uncomfortable question. Where did she get that knowledge from? In addition, there are the reports about the supernatural strength she displayed. And we're not talking about isolated moments, but a sequence of episodes witnessed by multiple people. Many of them, with no connection to each other, claimed the same thing. A young woman weighing just over 30 kilograms was capable of breaking free from the hands of 4-5 adults. How does that fit into any rational explanation? And it doesn't stop there. During some of the rituals, objects inside the house were seen moving on their own. Doors would slam, furniture would shake, crucifixes would fall from walls without anyone touching them. And even the priests involved reported feeling invisible presences, physical pressure, as if invisible hands were pushing them or squeezing their bodies. Was this the result of mass hysteria? Or was there truly a force at work there? Then comes one of the most unsettling parts, reports claiming that at certain moments, the entities would take on not only the voice but also the physical traits. Anneliese's face would distort, her eyes would change, her body would contort in ways that, according to witnesses, seemed to defy any anatomical limit. And once again, the question echoes, is it possible for the human mind to produce that? Or are we facing something that simply shouldn't exist? Over the years, researchers, skeptics, and believers have all immersed themselves in this case. Documentaries, books, analyses. And even after decades, no one has been able to definitively conclude what actually happened there. Was it a brutal failure of medicine, which couldn't treat a severely ill patient? Or a real case of possession, where forces far beyond our understanding decided to manifest? The most disturbing realization is how this case still feels so alive. The photos of Anneliese in her final months are, to this day, hard to look at. Her completely deteriorated appearance doesn't seem like just the result of an illness. It seems like something more. something that consumed not only her body, but everything she was. And even today, there are those who believe that the very place where it all happened still carries traces of this story, that the house where the rituals were performed was never the same. There are reports of people claiming to hear sounds coming from there, even years later, as if the echoes of that suffering were never truly silenced. What, in fact, killed Anneliese Michel? A mind in collapse, or the real presence of something far beyond anything any of us are prepared to understand? The case of Anneliese Michel didn't end with the trial. In fact, it turned into something even bigger, a symbol of an eternal clash between science, faith, and the unknown. Decades later, it still sparks debates, inspires films, documentaries, and provokes deep discomfort in anyone who dives into the story. There are those who argue, even today, that everything that happened to her was the result of a devastating combination of epilepsy, psychosis, severe depression, and religious fanaticism. For them, Anneliese was a victim of an era when the lack of understanding about mental health was combined with outdated beliefs, leading a fragile young woman to an absolutely preventable death. On the other hand, there is a group, and it's not a small one, that firmly believes this was one of the clearest and most well-documented cases of demonic possession in modern history. And they rely not on assumptions, but on the recordings, the witnesses, the physical manifestations, and everything that, to this day, science has not been able to satisfactorily explain. And if you think the theories stop there, you're mistaken. There are lines of thought that go even further, suggesting that Anneliese was not just a random victim, that maybe she was targeted by something much greater, a kind of involuntary sacrifice within an invisible conflict between forces that we humans are not even capable of fully comprehending. Something that goes beyond possession and touches dimensions we cannot even imagine. There are those who claim that the rituals themselves, instead of expelling, actually fed what was there, as if the confrontation, rather than liberating, provoked an even more violent reaction, intensifying the presence of the entities and draining every last bit of vital energy left in Anneliese. And here arises an uncomfortable question. Could it be that, in some cases, trying to fight evil actually makes it grow? In addition, there are records pointing to something even stranger. After Anneliese's death, her grave became a pilgrimage site. People reported having visions, hearing voices, feeling presences. And years later, there was even an exhumation of her body, prompted by rumors that it had not decomposed naturally. Although the church never officially confirmed any abnormality with the body, the fact is that this episode only further fueled the theories. And if you're wondering, but what about today? What's left of all this? The answer is as disturbing as the story itself. The recordings are still available. The photos are still circulating. The Michel family home remains marked, and the debate is still alive. Scientists, priests, researchers, and the curious continue trying to piece together a puzzle that, perhaps, will never form a complete picture. What remains is an uncomfortable feeling, because when looking at all this, it's impossible not to wonder, how far does the power of the human mind really go? And is there truly a boundary between the psychological and the supernatural? Or perhaps has that boundary never actually existed? As much as medicine, religion, and even justice have tried to offer answers, the truth is that the story of Anneliese Michel remains shrouded in shadows. A story that transcends generations, dividing opinions, sending chills down spines, and above all, leaving a permanent scar on the thin line that separates the real from the unexplainable. This story is just one piece, and one day, maybe you'll see the whole puzzle. If this also made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. And don't forget to share it, because after all, more voices mean more discoveries.